Welcome to my review of The Iron Heel by Jack London. Published in 1907, it describes changes from what is the present 1907 society to a dystopia. As the socialists try to revolt against the capitalists, turns out the capitalists are a lot more stronger and vicious than the socialists thought. The main character's name is Everhard, and he is a socialist. In fact, he's probably just Jack London inserted into the book. But the narrator is a woman who becomes his fiancée and then wife. But also, the book is seen from 700 years in the future. In fact, the footnotes are by a socialist society who's looking back and describing and sometimes finding humorous many of the events in the book. It's kind of mixed up. So while people call it a dystopia, at the time it would have been kind of future history, and now many of us look at it as alternate history because many of the events didn't happen. Most of the book is a lecture about socialism. Jack London was born in poverty, but he became quite rich. But before that, he saw basically the poor and the lower class all around him. He was the poor and lower class. He worked in the factories for pennies a day, and he really at heart felt that things needed to be changed. The problem is that while he's a great writer in some respects, when it comes to the Iron Heel, it comes out, especially the first part, as a document, a political pamphlet given out on the street. While he does quote a lot of information about the laborers' conditions, the poverty, prostitution, even though he himself firsthand experienced and saw a lot of it, still comes out like he's an armchair socialist. And, well, it comes out a little boring. The second part of the book is about the revolt, the fact that socialists try to overthrow the capitalist system, what we would call fascist today. In doing so, they fail and give the capitalists a reason to strengthen their hold to the point where it does become a fascist state. In fact, the people looking back 700 years talk about how it took over 200 years before the socialists won. There's multiple revolts. The end result is a feeling that while it might be inevitable, is not easy. In fact, Everhard continuously looks at the socialists who are with him and keep on talking about, we'll win in the next election, we'll be able to overthrow this government and change it, and so on and so forth. He's like, really? While Everhard doesn't believe in violence, he does see the class struggle as being violent in its nature. While he would like a pacifist approach, it doesn't seem he believes in it. He is part also of a council, a committee, one of the leaders. The end result is a feeling that Everhard, and maybe Jack London, is leaning more towards communism than socialism. Also, the end of the book deals with one of the revolts, and it's violent, ruthless, bloody. Both the capitalists, who are actually fascists, but that term wasn't really used until much later, and the socialists are using the lower class to do the battle, and it actually comes across as quite harsh and callous. Excuse me. In fact, the female narrator who is watching all this notices that she can't tell her comrades from the mercenaries. She actually watches a person who's been wounded, morally wounded, a person of the lower class who knows that they're going to die, nobody helped them, and she doesn't help them. It comes across a little almost anti-socialist. You got a feeling that Jack London's feelings towards capitalism is, anti-capitalism. You see the poverty, but he also feeling towards his fellow socialists is that they're somewhat naive, and maybe he's starting to change his ideas. Jack London in real life was a little racist. He was a white supremacist, and he did believe in Darwinism and social Darwinism. And many people believe that, especially George Orwell, who obviously was influenced by this book, felt that if Jack London hadn't died when he did, he might have gone from a socialist viewpoint to a communist or something worse. In fact, many socialists didn't like the book because they felt it put a spin, an anti-socialist spin on socialism. It made him look bad. Yet, the Third Reich put his name on the book burning list and did burn a lot of his books because of this. Because obviously the capitalists in it are actually fascists. Once again, that term wasn't around at the time. But the book is a mixed bag. I would give it a 3 out of 5. If you're a person interested in history or philosophy or political thought, it's something you really want to read. If you're a fan of White Fang and Call of the Wild, it's something you want to read. But you do want to read a bit of salt. He predicts a lot of things that happen. The socialist revolutions, he said, would happen. But he also said that in the book, for example, a war between the United States and Germany is about to happen, but the workers on each side unite and have a general strike and tell the governments, no, we're not going to have workers fighting workers. He did not predict nationalism. He did not predict that the United States itself would neither go towards the fascist nor the socialist viewpoint. It would actually try to destroy the trusts and work with labor in some cases. And so there's this extreme idea that socialism would have revolts, sometimes fail, but in the end it succeed. Didn't really happen. There were revolts, but not all of them were crushed by capitalists. Most of them were crushed from inside by the socialists, who we know as, of course, as communists. The end result is a book that has a lot of interesting elements in it. Some of them, obviously, in the forefront, anti-capitalist, but also parts that are somewhat hidden, put in there by an author who didn't probably realize his viewpoints were leaking through. Anti-socialist, a little racism, a little Darwinism. A gentleman whose mind was changing even while he was writing about supporting a movement that he believed in, but was starting maybe not to believe in. It's interesting. You know, the authors are always talking about things that are in their book that they never meant to be there. Readers seeing things that never were there. Just like there's that debate about Star Wars and George Lucas. The fact is, every movie, every book is going to be interpreted whether you want it to be interpreted or not. And this is a case where you could interpret it one way, but then when you read up on the author and get a little more information about what he was writing about, which I did in my second reading of this book for the review, you suddenly see it in another way. Okay? Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.